Okay. Okay, so that's that. We are looking at cutting tools, and the objectives for our lesson is to be able to identify cutting tools in their various groups, state their uses, and see how we can maintain and care for them. Cutting tools are used by various group of artisans. These include woodwork, metalwork, and blockwork. Let's begin with the woodwork cutting tools, and that is the saws. Please, am I okay now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we are going to take the saws one after the other and see what they are used for. When we say saw, they are actually the woodwork tools that are used to cut the wood into pieces or required sizes or remove waste from the wood. You agree with me that most of the artifacts we see in our community, homes, the school, either are completely made of wood or partly made of wood. If you want to join the wooden pieces, you measure them. We looked at that during the last lesson through what we call setting out. That's the process of transferring the measurement. After you have transferred the measurement, you need to prepare the wooden pieces. And it will happen that when you measure the thing to the required size, there may be excess or waste that you have to remove. Even when you measure accurately, sometimes it becomes necessary that you cut the wood into two pieces and rejoin them in a particular way. So the tools that we use for cutting the wood pieces or removing the waste is what we call the saw. That's a common one. So saw are tools used for cutting wood into pieces of required sizes or removing waste from wood. And we have different types in woodwork. But for this lesson, we are going to consider the following saws. We will look at what we call the rib saw, cross-cut saw. We have what we call the back saw, which come in different sizes for different purposes. Then we have the coping saw. So for this lesson, for today, we are going to basically consider only saws. So let's start with the rib saw. The rib saw usually is the biggest of all the woodwork hand saws. I mentioned hand saw because we have what we call the circular saw, which is powered by electricity. That one is machine. So here we are not considering machines. We are talking about saws that are manually operated. You hold it yourself and use it to cut the wood, as demonstrated in the picture on the right here. So a rib saw is designed specially to rip the wood. When we say to rip the wood, we use it basically to cut the wood along the grain. Please watch the wood here that the saw is cutting. If you look at the direction of the grains, it moves in this direction. That direction is what we call along the grain. And the saw we use for cutting that is the rib saw. So we use it to rib cut. So the rib saw is used for cutting wood along the grain of the wood. So here you can see it says the cut is made parallel to the direction of the wood. That means along the grain, the direction that the wood is flowing.
Grain or brain?
Come again.
Did you say grain or brain?
Grain, G-R-A-I-N, grain. That is the direction of the fiber, how the fibers of the wood are arranged. They are normally arranged in a particular direction, okay? That's what we call the grain of the wood. Now, the cutting edge of each teeth has a flat front edge, and it is angled backwards. What I'm saying, you may not understand, but when you go to the next slide, you understand it perfectly. Now, what other difference do we see when it comes to the rib saw? When you take the rib saw, if you measure, this is what we call this is the teeth where I'm painting. Can you see?
Yes.
Teeth of the saw. Now, when you take every 1 inch length of the edge, the cutting edge here, when you measure every 1 inch, depending on the size of the rib saw, you count just about 4 to 10 teeth. I don't know if you got that right. See these small projections here. These small projections, that's what we call the teeth. And for every 1 inch that you measure, you can count between 4 to 10 teeth there. That is for the rib saw, because the rib saw come in different sizes. So the bigger the rib saw, then higher the number of teeth per inch. Please, is that clear? So the smaller versions, you can see some of them, you can see about 10 teeth, okay? But the bigger ones, you may see just about 4 teeth per every 1 inch that you measure. Yes, Ellen. Ellen, any problem?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. The opposite of the rib saw, we call it cross-cut saw. Let's look at the cross-cut saw in the next slide. This is the cross-cut saw. Now, when you observe the diagram you have here, you can see the direction of the cut. The man in the picture is cutting the wood across the grain, unlike the previous picture where the cutting was, it was ripping along or parallel to the grain. This one is cutting along the grain, across the grain. Second difference is that the number of teeth here also differ, and also the angle to which the teeth are tilted. Let's go and look at it. The direction of the angle of the cut is different from that of the cross cut. So the rib saw has 8 teeth, okay, sharpened in chisel-like form. The surface of the cut, the teeth is in chisel form, while that of the cross-cut saw is in the form of knife. So we have knife point for cross-cut and then chisel point for the rib saw. Let's look at pictures to explain that. You can see the chisel I'm talking about and the knife. You see this one looks like the knife, the way they sharpen knife. That's the cross-cut. And this one looks like chisel.
Yes,
I see the difference.
Yes, sir.
So this is rib saw, the teeth of rib saw, and this is the teeth of cross-cut saw. Another one here. Is that okay? The same thing I have enlarged here is what we are seeing here. So these two are linked and these two are also linked. Is that okay? Now let's also look at it. Now when you turn the teeth and you are looking at the teeth, you turn the teeth towards your face and you are looking at it. This is what you see for the crosscut saw. While one teeth turns in a different direction, they tilt the other also in another direction. So this is how the teeth of the crosscut saw appear. When you look at it directly from your eye view, you turn it and you are looking at it directly. This is how they've tilted them. And this is how that of the rib saw is tilted. So this is the difference between them. However, for the sizes, usually they are almost the same in length and size. They all come in different length and size depending on the job you want to use it for. If the wood you want to cut is very small, you need a smaller version for cutting along the grain and across the grain. So basically, we use the cross-cut saw to cut across the grain of the wood and the rib saw to cut along the grain. The next saw we are going to look at is the back saw. Why do we call it back saw? We call it back saw because when you observe the pictures on the right here and on the left, you see some objects attached to the back of the saw. You see some objects, look at them carefully. You see some objects at the back of the saw. What happens is that with the rib and the crosscut saw, we don't have anything attached to the back. There's nothing here holding it. So when you are cutting, usually the blade will wander and the direction of the blade is usually not controlled. So if you don't control it and you are cutting, it may not follow the line you have drawn or you have marked along which you want to cut. Because the blade of the rib saw is flexible, that of the crosscut saw is also flexible. Is that okay? But when you take the back saw has a material fixed at the opposite end of the cutting edge, which makes the blade stiff, which means that when you are cutting, the blade will not wander. However, because of the brass that has been attached to the back, it means that when you are cutting,
She doesn't want us to see.
I've not cut my hair. I've not got it. I've not cut.
Cut them off, right?
Hello.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, we can anyway.
Okay. So we were discussing.
So please, when the time goes, should we join again?
It will be determined by the progress of the lesson. So let's move on.
Okay.
We were looking at the back saw, and what I'm saying is that the back saw are hand saws, smaller ones that have brass. I hope you know brass. Brass is a metal.
Yeah.
Okay, so engineers design the saw and attach brass at the back. And the essence of doing that is to make the blade of the saw very stiff. So you can see all these ones with something fixed at the back. Okay. Now, why do they do that? I'm saying that when you take the rig saw and the cross-cut saw, they do not have the brass attached. This say you are disturbing. Mute your mic, Sise. So when you are cutting with a rib saw or the cross-cut saw, because there's nothing at the back to make the blade stiff,
Yes.
the blade is likely not to follow the mark along which you are cutting. But advantage is that when you are cutting with the rib saw or the cross-cut saw, the saw is able to cut through the material. You can see the picture here. The saw will be able to pass through the material without any obstruction. But with the back saw, because of the back here, the blade cannot pass through the material. So we use it to cut pieces of material that the blade doesn't need to pass through. So they are designed specifically for specific jobs. And we have about 3 types of them. We have the first one, which is the tenon saw. So the tenon saw is a back saw for cutting mortise and tenon joints. Look at the design, very beautiful. The tenon saw, the difference between the tenon saw and the next one we are going to look at is the design of the handle. This is the handle. This part is the handle. This part is the blade. And the edge here is what we call the teeth. And then the stiffening back. We use this to cut what we call tenon joints. What is tenon joint? Please come to the left side here. There's more video that is playing. The piece of object here, this portion that has been designed to be able to fit into the hole. The hole is called mortise. That extension of this wooden piece here, which fits into that hole, is what we call the tenon. So if you want to cut such a piece of joint, you need this particular saw, which we call the tenon saw, to be able to cut that. Now, there's a smaller version of this tenon saw, which we call the sash saw. And this is it. So you can see the designs to be the same. Look at the handle, the same as the one we looked at on the previous page. We use this one to cut sash. When we say sash, I'm demonstrating it here for the picture here is explaining it. When this kind of window, the joints you see there are referred to as sash. When the sash is painted, sometimes you want to do some cut. The tenon saw itself is too big for that job. So we have smaller version of it that can cut any piece here that we want to remove. Okay, and that is where the sash saw comes in. The sash saw is simply a tenon saw that is smaller. Then we have the dovetail saw. The dovetail saw is also a back saw, similar to the tenon saw. However, the handle has a different design. You can see the handle is open, unlike the tenon saw, which has the handle closed. You can see the handle here is closed. This place is complete. But the dovetail saw, the handle is half open. As we can see in this diagram, you can see the space here for the handle. Now, when we say dovetail joint, what do we mean? The dovetail joint is the joint we are seeing here. I think some time ago we discussed furniture joint.